Hello and welcome to Healing Conversations, the Table Podcast with me, Ntabi Sengwepe. I'm bringing you this topic that I chose today that we are going to thresh out simply because I realize that many people struggle with this topic. But before we get to that, I want you to remember this. Don't only watch our channel, but subscribe and like so that you are able to get our viewership and the right content back to you. It costs money obviously to make this kind of productions, so the more you subscribe, the easier it is in us getting this content to you. So hit the subscribe button and like. Remember this as well, so write to us if there's any topic that you'd like us to cover that you feel will help our society in terms of healing. Well, today I want us to speak on forgiveness. Guys, it's amazing how many of us struggle with forgiveness. It's amazing how many of us are unable to simply move past beyond experiences that cut us deep. You know, in our lives, there are things that will happen and they will really, cause you to change your entire perspective on life. They will also cause you to just develop hatred for other people. Maybe because of what a man in a relationship did to you, or what a sibling did to you, or what a parent did to you. Ultimately, you get to a point where you feel that it was so much. The cut itself was so deep that you are just unable to move past it. Well, today, I want us to really talk about the importance of forgiveness, because many of us don't realize how much of a valuable tool it is for us to get to a point where we have moved beyond the pain that we experienced. Many of us think that in us forgiving, we are actually nullifying or discounting the effect of what happened to us. But it's really not like that. Every time when you forgive someone, you are actually releasing yourself. You're doing a service to yourself. And what qualifies me to talk about this? Well, I've written extensively about my life. And one of the issues that I write about was I suffered a lot of infidelity in my life. And then I also suffered a lot of betrayals. And, they could have easily adjusted permanently my view towards life. And they could have caused me to develop a lot of hatred. They could have caused me to develop a lot of bitterness. And I'm actually wrong in saying they could have, because the truth is they did. One of the things that I've observed the most happens when people have been hurt and are unable to forgive is that there are a lot of hidden emotions that hide, behind the pain of the incident itself. Bitterness is one of the emotions. Hatred is one of the emotions. Lack of trust is one of the emotions. And, even loss of confidence is one of the emotions that we see people who have been cut deeply start to develop. You find that when a person is cheated on in a relationship, it changes their whole perspective about women, or it changes their whole perspective about men. And what is the result of that? The result of that is that someone becomes or develops a lot of hatred towards other women. And instead of getting into relationships because of the need of companionship or the love that one has to give to another person, it becomes about hating other people. So today, let's and talk about how forgiveness actually helps us. The myth that we have is that once I forgive someone, it doesn't matter what they did to me, firstly. Secondly, I need to keep them in my space. Thirdly, I need to pretend as if whatever happened never took place. Well, today we are dealing with those myths. I personally went through experiences which were tough for me, but I started to understand and observe that the longer and more I was holding on to the experiences that happened, the deeper the pain. It was as if I was reliving the experiences all over again. And this was simply because I chose to hold on to it. And as a result, everything that happened triggers and takes me back to what happened in the past. So one of the things that I observed was the fact that I was not living a really free life. I had no freedom because I was trapped in the incident of what happened in my life. That is when I came to realize that we downplay the importance of forgiveness. We downplay the need for us to break free of whatever happens so that we start living a life that is, healing focused, that is more, happiness and joy focused, as opposed to living in a cage. Because pain really does cage you. Anger really does cage you. Harboring grudges really does cage you. And I want to take us a step back. Whenever someone does something to you, we tend to have it in our minds that this person hurt me and this person wronged me, which is granted, very correct. This person, what they did to me is just so horrible. And indeed, you find that our feelings are justified. But what we lose focus of is the fact that our entire existence becomes defined in terms of that one moment. Our entire life becomes defined in terms of that one incident. And the result becomes the following. Every time experiences come in your life, you measure them against that one experience. You measure each and every person that you encounter against that one experience. If the betrayal happened in a relationship, you look at every man in the same light. You look at every woman in the same light. If it happened in a parent relationship, you become skeptical of every older or elder figure in your life. You start viewing that person with the mindset that older people cannot be trusted. I don't want to surround myself with men or women. They cannot be trusted. Why? Because so and so did this and that to you. Now, the reality of the matter is, if that perspective doesn't change, if that mindset is not eroded, it becomes the measuring yard through which you live your life. And the result becomes a life that is lacking in terms of peace, a life that is lacking in terms of joy. One of the benefits of forgiving people is that you start taking accountability for yourself. One of the myths that are prevalent when one has been offended is the fact that you're giving forgiveness to the offender, or rather the person who has offended you, is conditional about them, or is conditional upon them deserving the forgiveness, is conditional upon them requesting or even wanting to be forgiven. I always tell people this: whenever you are in a situation where you have been hurt, the issue of you forgiving someone should not depend on that person, but rather it should depend on you, your willingness to move, your willingness to forgive. And I cannot really discuss this if I don't relate it entirely to the Bible. The Bible tells us to forgive because we want to be forgiven. Imagine if you had wronged someone and that person does not forgive you, and that person does not, give you mercy. We often think that the people who have offended us are not in pain because of what they did to us. Yes, they are in pain. Some people act the way they act simply because they have not a better knowledge. If a person knows how to behave better in that setup, they would definitely do better. If a person knew how to be a better husband, they would definitely do better. And for some of us, really, the reality is that we had no one to teach us how to relate better to other people. So going around breaking trust, it's normal to us, simply because we have never had the education of how valuable trust is in relationships. For some of us, going ahead and being honest and making honesty the barometer or a necessity in the relationships that we have, it's not normal. So we go on telling lies because we have never had an education of the importance of honesty in relationships. So the aftermath and the consequences of what our dishonesty does, We don't really familiarize ourselves with it. So the consequences and the fact that it may lead someone to, for the rest of their life, not have trust in you, it becomes something that we don't even consider. Now, I want to go back. Whenever we have been hurt, put yourself and prioritize your emotions first. How do you do that? You ask yourself, do I want to be in this situation where I am feeling this way forever? The truth of the matter is, pain weighs heavily on us. Bitterness weighs heavily on us. Every emotion that is anti-love weighs heavily on us. Hatred weighs heavily on us. Lack of trust weighs heavily on us. It's a given that whenever you love someone, you trust that person. So the opposite of that becomes a painful emotion to carry. So the question becomes, do I want to dwell in this place? If, for example, you are in a situation where you have been betrayed, you either choose to become a victim of that situation by surrendering yourself to the pain of the betrayal, or you choose to say, I want to move past it. I want to go on with my life despite whatever has happened. And for many of us, sadly, we make the offender wanting or seeking our forgiveness to be the number one consideration. Do you see what I just said right there? It's different when you become the number one factor, because the issue becomes, I don't want to feel this way anymore. I don't want to get stuck where I am at anymore. It's not about the other person. You may wait for a long time if you wait for someone to come and ask for your forgiveness. You may wait a long time if you're waiting for someone to realize how much they have wronged you. The reality is, for many of us, the hurt and the pain that we suffer, the people who have offended us don't even realize how wrong they were. They don't even realize that they need to come and apologize to you. So you seeking an apology from someone who doesn't even realize the wrongness of their action is just a futile exercise. That is why forgiveness must firstly depend and be conditional upon you. Do you want to remain where you are at now, or do you want to move forward? Forget about the offender. Forget about what happened. Look at yourself. The reality is, it happened, but it left me tainted. It left me lacking trust. It left me with a lot of hatred. What do you now want to do? Do you want to remain here? For many of us, we don't realize this. Forgiveness is a weapon. When you decide to forgive the person who has offended you, you are using that weapon to free yourself. You are using forgiveness to cut yourself out of a cage that has caged your life. You are using forgiveness to say, I choose no longer to be in this place. You are taking it as a lock, as a key to a lock that has imprisoned your life. It's in moving towards forgiveness that you take the most integral step of empowering yourself. For many people, they get so angry that they would even say the words, I don't see myself forgiving this person. I don't know how I will ever be able to forgive this person. What they're actually saying is, I don't know how I will get out of this prison that I am in. Choose today not to be a prisoner of the pain that you have. Choose today not to be a prisoner of the experiences of your past. Choose today not to live your life expecting to move forward, but trapped in your past. That's the reality of most people. We are trapped in the pain of what happened. We have lost vitality for life. We have lost vitality for relationships. We have lost the joy that we are supposed to carry every day in our lives, simply because of an encounter that happened. And as a result, we measure our whole life according to that encounter. I've spoken to many people and they will say to you, no, I can't tshwarela because it's so big. The magnitude of what happened is just so big. I don't see myself really getting over it. I don't see myself really moving past it. The reality is, these incidences, they are life-altering. That's the reality of it. They are life-altering. The greatest danger, though, is what you become from the one incident. Yes, the incident happened. It has the power to alter your life. But the additional steps of it actually altering your life is entirely in your hands. This is where the role of awareness comes in. Many of us do not allow ourselves to get to a stage of where we are aware of what is happening within us. Self-awareness is very key. The ability to sit down with yourself, listen to yourself, assess yourself mentally, emotionally, spiritually, and ask yourself, why am I feeling this way? Why am I looking at life this way? That will enable you to start collecting the dots that my lack of trust actually emanates from this one incident. It allows you to start connecting the dots and saying that because of this incident, I have now started behaving in this fashion. And now we take it a step further to say, do I now want to remain as the incident defines me, as the dots tell me that I am? Because it's the very dots that you collect and start connecting that now will tell you, this person that you are is because of this. And then you start working on yourself. You start working on yourself. Now I want to take you to this aspect which is very key. Not somebody else working on you. That is the mistake that I've observed many people do. We get hurt by people, and then we become so ignorant that we take the very heart that has been battered by someone and entrust its healing and its forgiveness to the very same person who has offended you. I believe in my heart of hearts that it is foolish and reckless to expect the same person who hurt you, to expect the same person who offended you to now work towards your healing. You forgiving anybody who has hurt you, it starts with you. It's about you and it's for you. This is where the journey of healing becomes key in your life. When we hold on to anger, when we hold on to bitterness, when we hold on to many other hidden chaotic emotions that are under the surface because of a one incident that we cannot forgive, we are actually allowing our lives, the perception of who we are, to be completely altered. So it's time that we now go back and desire and seek the freedom of working in the identity that we have. And that identity can only come forth when you start addressing the wrongs that have been done against you. For many of us, we think that it's important that I forgive and then I just move on. I just move on. But we forget that moving on is a journey. It's a journey on its own. It's not a destination. So whenever you get to a place where you identify that I've been wronged and you start now saying, I want to move on, you must be prepared for the process that is the journey itself. When we say to people, can't you just move on? And we put a time frame on it, and we put a lifespan on it, and we put an expectation, a time expectation on it, we are actually robbing them of the platform to process their emotions. Because one has to go back and think, how did that really make me feel? When this happened, when so and so did this to me, how did it make me feel? That's when they need the room to actually confront those emotions. I felt hurt. I felt anger. I felt belittled. I felt that I didn't matter. And for some of us, we are even able to vocalize those emotions. Some of us, we are not able to vocalize them. We are able to jot them down, to journal about them. Whichever way we process them, but we've got to get to a point where we process those emotions. So be careful. Once you've reached a state of self-awareness and taken the decision of moving towards your healing, not to jump the process, not to overlook the process, but to go through the process. It's not a nice part, I know. I'm very much aware. I've had to sit down, with my own experiences and ask myself, but why did this happen? And it has left me feeling this way. And the why has been even more painful, simply because I've never been able to find the answers to the why. Sometimes we are very good to people. Sometimes we become we give so much of ourselves to relationships. We give so much of ourselves to others. And because we are so good to them, we believe that they should in turn be good to us. But people can only give what they have. When a person doesn't have love, it becomes very difficult for them to give love. When a person is dishonest, it becomes very difficult for them to give honesty. When a person is not trusting, it becomes very difficult for them to be trustful. So we encounter people with their own experiences. And as we interact with them, that's what makes or gives birth or brews the many ills that we start experiencing in the relationships that we have. So, the painful part of it is that we cannot answer the whys. But the reality is you dealt with someone who was not able to reciprocate where you were at. And the result is what took place in your life. So moving on is a journey of confronting that, accepting it, not denying it as well. For some people, it's been easy for them not to deal with whatever happened because they simply fall into denial. It never happened. For some, they disassociate. I've spoken to people where they would say, for the longest part, I dwelt in my studies. I set so much on focus, so much in my studies that I never allowed myself room to think about the time when I was being molested. I never allowed myself room to think about the time when I was raped. I never allowed myself room to think about the time when I was being battered or I was being beaten. That's how people deal with them. Different emotions, but you've got to come to a place where you confront those very emotions. It's only in doing that that your journey of healing starts. Remember now, you are walking towards being released. You're walking towards being released, getting out of the chains and the shackles that are binding you. Right? Now, for many of us, we get stuck here because it's a painful process. Imagine going to find the 8-year-old girl within you. Imagine going to find the 12-year-old rejected, abandoned, molested child within you. Imagine going back in time. At the time, perhaps you're 40, perhaps you're in your 50s, and you've got to go back and draw on the emotional experiences of that little girl that you were, or that little boy that you were. It's an exercise that requires you to be courageous. It's an exercise that requires you to be brave. It's an exercise that requires you to not be naive about its emotional cost to you. And this is why I tell people, even though you may not realize the role of therapy, it's very key because it will take you back. You will cry like it happened yesterday. You will feel the rawness of the emotions like it's taking place now, like it took place a couple of hours ago, simply because you have now come back to open the door. This is why I say to people, when you are dealing with your mental healing and healing your heart, you've got to find a strategy that will help you heal. And this is where the role of clinical intervention becomes serious. This is where spiritual groundedness becomes serious. Because for many of us, we look for clinical intervention, we find the psychologist, but at the end of the day, they give us a strategy, but you've got nothing to hold on to. Because the psychologist will tell you, okay, this is how we're going to approach your healing. This is how we're going to work on your healing. And this is how a step-to-step progression of how we get you to your healed state. But at the end of the day, there's got to be something of solid substance that enables you to start looking at and redefining the whole lens through which you have written life. The lens of distrust, the lens of hatred. This is where you've got to draw on to something. For me, it has been spirituality. For me, it has been the Word of God. And for me, it has been the understanding of the principles of God. And more particularly, the fact that I myself am a product of God's mercy. So when someone wrongs me, I then go back and say, but God, you forgive me every day. It's only right that I forgive the other person. And then I go back and I say, but God, even when I was cheated on, and I've suffered incidences where there's been infidelity in my life, and it has made me question myself, and it has made me question my worth and my identity. But it's only in those instances where I draw onto the Word of God that I'm able to go back and I find who I am, and I find what God says about me. So it no longer becomes material how I feel or how the incident made me feel, because I walk according to the compass of who God says I am. I now look at myself according to the perspective of who God says I am. So it doesn't matter anymore whatever happened and how it made me feel. Okay. Now you've got to realize this, that being released from the chains of your past, it is the reward. It's the reward of you standing up. The longer you sit in that cage, the more life passes you by, the more experiences pass you by, the more peace you will not have. So you've got to fight to be released. You've got to take the step towards your being released. And now, you must also understand this, that it's not only about you getting the reward of being released, but it's also about you regaining trust. Regaining the victory of trust. Because at the end of the day, you want to be able to have a very good relationship with people. You want to be able to take from people and give, without questioning the other person, without having a mindset that this person will betray me. It's about you building solid relationships, but you're not able to build them as long as you're not being released, and you're not being able to build them as long as you don't have trust. At the end of the day, it comes down to the final endeavor for you. And that should be walking in life with trust in God and with trust in people. And that is what you are looking for. Because at the end of the day, you're looking for freedom. And you will not have freedom as long as you don't have trust. You will not have freedom as long as you're not being able to work towards your being released from the pain. The truth of the matter is that some of these hurtful experiences that happen with people, they are also the cause of us not even trusting God. Some of us ask ourselves, where was God when this person did this to me? Where was God? Did he ignore what happened? Did he not see what was being done to me? Did he not see the suffering? Could he not have protected me? The reality of the matter is that God was there and he was not silent. And oftentimes, that is why I go back to the previous statement I made when I said our offenders are also in pain. We think that our offenders will not be hurt by what happened, but the opposite is exactly true. While we are in hurt about what someone did to us, they are also in hurt about what they have done to you. And this is what the enemy does. The enemy causes people to do things to others. And when those things have happened, it's only when they start looking at themselves that they start questioning who they are. How could I have behaved like this? I could have been a better husband. I could have been a better wife. I could have been a better boyfriend. I could have been a better father. I could have been a better sister. And that's when the guilt comes in. That's when, the self-doubt always comes in. That is when the enemy uses a double-edged sword against the offender and against the victim. So some of us are also even battling with self-forgiveness. We have offended others, but we cannot even forgive ourselves. This is also relevant to you. And the same applies. Acknowledgement of the fact that you played a role in hating someone. Acknowledgement of the fact that you are responsible. Your conduct is responsible for the hurt that someone is going through. The willingness to say, I want to forgive myself for what I have done. Regardless of whether the person sees you deserving of forgiveness or not. Because at the end of the day, like I said, some people will tell you, this person did this to me, I will never forgive them. You've got to be able to forgive yourself. So in a nutshell, on this podcast today, we are speaking to both the offender and the victim. Forgiveness applies to both of you. The ability to forgive the person who has offended you and the ability to forgive yourself as well. Now, for most people, we ask how? How do I forgive? How do I forgive? The first step is to accept that it is too big for you to forgive just by your own ability. You know, some of these things that happen to us, they are so big. And you realize that just by myself, just thinking about this myself, you realize that this is just way beyond me. That's when the grace of God comes in. And you lean towards God and you say, Lord, I don't know, but I want to get out of this. I want to move beyond this. I want to leave what happened behind me. Enable me, help me, carry me so that I'm able to forgive. Because by yourself, you can't do it. You can't do it. Secondly, how do I now relate to my offender? The greatest myth there is out there is that when you forgive someone, it means that you must rebuild relations. This is where wisdom comes in. You've got to have the wisdom to know when a betrayal cuts so deep that you have to take away a lesson from it. And when you've got to be able to say, I cannot risk putting myself in a similar position. There are those instances where we forgive and we rebuild. It is possible to rebuild. When you see remorse from the other person as well, and when you see the need and the acknowledgement to say, I understand how deep I have cut you. I understand how deep what I have done affects you. But in some instances, you're relating to someone who you want to forgive, but this person is not even bothered about what they've done. That's when you don't forgive in order to rebuild. You forgive, but you don't expose yourself further to the situation. Some people are not having the wisdom in this area because they will forgive and keep going back. They forgive and keep going back. And then when the same thing keeps happening over and over and over and over again, that is why they come back and then they say, I thought this person will change. It's because you didn't have the wisdom to learn and understand that there was no accountability on their part. There was no understanding on their part. There was no reform on their part. You don't forgive someone so that they can reform. You forgive someone so that the pain and the power of what happened does not hold you down. You leave them and focus on yourself. In most cases, it is possible to rebuild, but also in some, it is not necessary to rebuild. I usually weigh it on the following. Is this person who has hurt me reforming in any way? Do I see a change in them? And when I see a change, I step up so that I allow them the opportunity to also self-discover who they are beyond the wrong that they have committed. And for some people, it's just too far gone. There's no possibility of reformation. And in those instances, I usually walk away. So this requires wisdom, like I said. And it requires you to be very observant of where your offender is. All right. Now, some people will also say, because I have forgiven, it seems like my offender expects me to be friends. And when I say friends, I use particularly this word because some people will say, no, it seems like he or she expects me to be in their space. Look, the reality of the matter is that once someone has hurt you, you cannot undo what has been done. Once someone has broken trust, you cannot pretend as if that has not been done. What you can do is move past it, however, protect yourself. Protect yourself. You don't need to be in the spaces that are going to remind you time in and time out of what happened. You don't need to be in those spaces that are going to put you at a risk again of what happened. I'll give you a simple example. It's not as simple as I'm going to say it. It is a very sensitive example, but I will use it nonetheless. If someone has violated you physically, it is not wise to forgive and then expose yourself to that person, because you don't know if there is a possibility of the violation happening again. In such an instance, it is wise to forgive, stay away, take a lesson from it. For most of us, we fail to take lessons from the people who offend us. We fail to take lessons from the incidences that took place in our lives. If you take a lesson, you will come to understand this incident tells me something about this person that has committed it. This incident also tells me or reveals something about me. In some instances, it reveals the fact that you don't do any due diligence. In some instances, it reveals the fact that you jump in haste. In some instances, it reveals that you don't check first. In some instances, it reveals that a simple background check could have prevented you from being where you are at. Because the history of the offender will tell you this is a trend in his or her life. So for most of us, you need to take away a lesson from the incident that had happened. Take a lesson, hold on to that lesson, and say, I know that when it comes to so and so, they cannot be trusted on this aspect. I know when it comes to so and so, that they are not honest in terms of holding on to their weight. They don't fulfill their promises. They don't do X, Y, and Z. They don't follow through on what they say. In such an instance, you are arming yourself for future interactions with this very person. So you will know going forward how to deal with them going forward. Now I want you to take a simple exercise and ask yourself, of the offenses that have been committed and the people that have committed those offenses to you, how many of them would you go back to and build relationships with? For some of them, you wouldn't dare. It's simply because when you observe them, you see there's no reformation. There is no turnaround in the person. So being in their space would be very careless for you. It would be careless for your future, because you would find yourself be subjected to the very hurt that got you here in the first place. Now, my final word to you and advice is the following. A life of bitterness is a very difficult life to live. Bitterness itself hides many other emotions. A life of being a victim is a life that is very limiting. It is a very powerless life. Because at the end of the day, you have surrendered your power to a specific incident. You have surrendered your power to a specific individual. Allow yourself to start walking a journey of healing. And it only begins when you want to explore forgiveness as a possibility. The only effect about unforgiving people is that the hurt will tend to affect them physically. We may deny this, and I'm not a medical expert in any way, but diseases such as strokes, such as anxiety, such as depression, they find their way to our health state. They find their way to our mental state. They find their way to the state of our hearts. So the longer we hold on to this kind of emotions, the more and more we're getting hurt. And the more dysfunctional relationships we have. Because hurt only spills over to other people. It only overspills and it continues perpetuating itself in many relationships that you will have. In as much as it is very uncomfortable, start working on forgiving those who have hurt you. Start working on forgiving those who, whether with your own participation or not, you have allowed to come closer to you, only for them to betray you. That's the only way that you start moving forward. I know that some of us are battling in this regard. Remember the Lord. He continuously forgives us. He continuously forgives us. So we must forgive because we are forgiven. If we don't, then in a way we are saying we don't deserve to be forgiven by the Lord. It's best to show mercy to others as we would want mercy to be shown to us. However, in doing so, don't be reckless by exposing yourself further to a situation that can hurt you deeper and deeper. I would love to know what your comments are on this topic, and I would very much appreciate you throwing your questions, on the comment section, so that if there's any aspect that we missed in dealing with this aspect, that we can come back and do a follow-up episode and maybe address those issues. If you want to get in contact with us and there's a specific issue or topic that you feel we should address for this purpose of this podcast, please use the email that is on your screen. Also, please get in contact with us on the number 082-504-2027 so that we can be able to take the discussion in the direction that would be most helpful to you. Ntabise Mwepe is my name. I look forward to discussing another thoughtful, impactful, healing conversation on this podcast with you.
Subscribe to Healing Conversations on YouTube and access fresh content from Healing Conversations, the Table Podcast with Ntabise Mwepe, available from April 2024. Also visit our online store to get yourself a copy of Ntabise Mwepe's latest release, Maintaining Your Joy, a journal for daily positive living. The second edition, available now.